He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Luke chapter 22, verse 36. This is the cherry pick to cherry pick all cherry picks. Is this a call to violence? Is this Jesus calling us to buy weapons? Let's find out. Let me start off by saying this is not a prescription. This is not a saying of Jesus. This is completely ripped out of context. And I've actually seen non-believers take this verse and say, Jesus calls us to violence, which is absolutely outrageous. Jesus is sending his disciples on their way. And so in self-defense, Jesus is advising that they buy a sword because they'll probably encounter criminals or bandits on their way there. It's also to defend themselves in case somebody tries to harm them for their beliefs. If you read through the book of Acts, you'll see that violence is never aggressive. It's always only passive. It is only ever permitted and used in the Bible in self-defense if we're talking about the four Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles. Some people actually think that it's not a literal sword, that Jesus is talking about a metaphorical sword that is the Word of God. Jesus knows that it'll be a spiritual battle ahead. Not only will they be clashing with pagans, they'll also be clashing with Jews. What I find extremely interesting is that the internal consistency with this sword verse is actually kind of mind-boggling. This is a literary device called Chekhov's gun, which is used in fictional stories, but it shows up in this non-fictional historical account. One of the key principles of Chekhov's gun is that you have to make sure that any items that you mention have significance later on in the story. And if they're not significant later on in the story, it's not worth mentioning. Which is why I think that this is not a metaphorical spiritual sword. This is a physical, actual sword that people use to defend themselves. The consequences of the disciples taking the swords actually happen later on. For example, Peter cuts off the ear of the servant, which, by the way, Jesus immediately condemns. See, this verse is an absolute cherry pick. I mean, this verse is crazily out of context. If somebody says, Jesus said buy a sword, so he's calling us to violence. Absolutely not the case. And ironically, I've seen non-believers and Christians take this as, oh, Christians need to buy a bunch of guns to defend themselves and blah, blah, blah. I'm not against self-defense. I'm not against buying a weapon to defend yourself and your family. But I'm just saying using this verse out of context to justify either Jesus is calling us to violence or Jesus is calling us to buy a bunch of weapons, it just doesn't make sense. All he's saying is, I'm sending you on your way, watch out for criminals and bandits, and you should probably get something to defend yourself with. See, God gave us free will, and that means we have the choice to either accept Jesus' teachings, read into them, and see what they actually mean, or we can deny them and weaponize them against the faith. The choice is ours. But looking at this verse in the wrong context, in the wrong frame of mind, is completely intellectually dishonest, and it completely ignores the conversation about what Jesus is saying. And also, taking other verses out of context ignores the conversation of, is Jesus perfect? Was Jesus perfect? And the answer to that is yes. Unless you take verses out of context, you will find no flaws in Jesus Christ, which is why I believe him to be 100% reliable. Thanks for watching. Follow the call to Christ, defend the faith, and God bless.